Hello and welcome to Banking Innovation Summit. My name is Mark Johnston and I'm your host for the next 45 minutes. Now this next session is entitled Open Banking, Open Finance, Open Data. Now in a moment I'm going to introduce our excellent speakers, but first of all a note for you, our audience at home. We want to hear your thoughts, we want to hear your opinions, and we want to get your questions. Pop them in the chat and we'll bring them into the discussion throughout this particular session. Okay. On to our excellent speakers. It's my pleasure to introduce to Banking Innovation Summit. We have Pedro de Sousa Avelino of NN Group. Hello, Pedro. If you want to give us a quick intro to who you are, please.
Of course, Mark. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. I'm a Brazilian. I come from the telco industry. Moved to financial services, specifically in insurance. NN Group is a big life insurance player in 12 markets in Europe, and including Japan. And now I'm based in Hungary, having passed in Czech Republic and seeing insurance and try to bridge this insurance as a laggard in financial services from insurtech field, open banking, open insurtechs, open insurance, and seeing this ecosystem develops. So that's it. Thank you.
Great, welcome Pedro. And also I'm delighted to welcome Hakan Eroglu of Mastercard. Hakan, welcome to the discussion. 30 seconds on you, please.
Thanks, James, for having me here as well, and hello, Pedro and Gina as well. So Hakan Eroglu, my name. I've been in payments consulting for many years, especially the focus of open API as well, and regulation of open banking, PSD2 and others. And joined Mastercard a while ago and leading open banking globally for advisors and helping banks and the wider ecosystem and regulators as well to unleash, the potential of open banking and open finance for themselves and for their consumers.
Great, thank you very much for that, Hakan. And finally, let's introduce our moderator for the session, bringing your questions into play. We've got Gina Clarke of the Fintech Times. Hello, Gina. Welcome to the discussion. Tell us a bit about you, please.
Hi, yep, thanks for having me. My name is Gina Clarke. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Fintech Times. We produce digital news, a newspaper, webinars on all things to do with the fintech industry, which, as you can expect, spans quite a lot, from pay tech to AI to all sorts. Background to myself, I've been a journalist for over 15 years and really kind of got into financial journalism when we had the 2016 referendum here in the UK. So that's pretty much about me.
Great, thank you, Gina. Welcome to all our panelists for the session. Now, if you've got a question, pop it in the chat and we'll bring it into the discussion. Let us know where you're tuning in from this morning. We can bring those to discussion into the point, and we can just give you a bit of a shout out on the chat as well. Okay, so first question I've got for our speakers. How is the open banking landscape progressing? Hakan, if we come to you with that first one, please.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. I think it's a quite broad question, but let me just focus on the hotspots of open banking. And it's not only Europe anymore, right? Europe has been the beginning with the UK and the PSD2 and the European Union. However, in the meantime, there is a perception in the market that the waters are relatively calm at the moment with open banking, but behind the curtains, there's a lot happening. So looking at Europe, for example, which, as I said, were the leading region, triggered open banking globally. We have more than 500 registered TPPs. Lots of companies have been launched, and if you look into what fintechs are doing right now, providing new applications for retail customers, for SME customers, those companies are valuated with very high amounts. So there's a lot happening. When you look into the UK with the open banking, the number of transactions rised up. I think in August it was 700 million AISP, account information requests, and still quite low, 9 million of payment initiations, which is around slightly more than 1%, but it's also picking up. As we are seeing more and more account-to-account payment-related use cases also being developed and implemented in the market. Is one of the big things at the moment, how to use open banking rails to allow new type of payment flows. Then looking outside of Europe, I would say in the MEA region, we have open banking regulations coming up in the UAE. Saudi Arabia has announced to come up with a regulation. So there is a lot happening on top of the other suspicious countries who have started the journey already. Now, I think from the bank's perspective, looking into behind the curtains is, yes, many banks have invested in opening up, in technology, in transforming their organization into an open API company to act as a more, let's say a platform business. Looking at the fintech side and those who are using open banking mechanisms and open banking rails to create new services, these companies are heading towards a super app approach. So how can they really bring in multiple players into one place to provide that super app? And how can banks compete, or how can banks build those services to be part of that ecosystem? And what we have also discovered is that the whole journey about, and even talking about it, has changed the mindset a lot at the leaderships of large banks in many regions. That is now, thinking about how can we be part of it, right? It's not the case that the banks will be the only ones. They will be part of the ecosystem, but an important part, especially when it comes to trust. They will play an important part, but what's their play here? So that's something that banks are looking at right now to invest. Now, and as a last point, I want to highlight, since the topic today is open banking, open finance, open data, I think regions like or countries like UAE and others, they are tapping into open finance directly without going that open banking journey where you have access to account or current accounts only or savings accounts and to initiate payments. In open finance, we are talking about a 360-degree view of the customer, looking into different other financial products and services like insurance. So Pedro will talk about pensions, mortgages, loans, investments, and more. But that's only access to data to allow new type of services. But open finance will also allow to initiate transactions like we have seen in open banking with payment initiation. We will see use cases like apply for a loan or apply for a mortgage or open or buy a policy in an insurance company. So these are use cases that makes it much more useful for the ecosystem build services for the end consumers. But I'll also leave the stage to Pedro also to deep dive on what he's doing in his space.
Great, thanks so much for that, Hakan. Great start. And Pedro, let's come to you. Your thoughts on that, please.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Hakan, and nice to see you, Gina. Yeah, Hakan already wisely and masterfully described some of the scenarios that we can see planning out across the globe. And if I can say this from an European standpoint, is some of the few key elements, and just expanding on what Hakan said. One, due to how privacy conscious European citizens are usually more concerned and more tapped into this, they're looking at specifically in how to provide data, still maintaining the ownership of their own data and giving the flexibility of access with their consent. And I think that the consent and the trust between those entities and the relationship within the open banking or open data specifically, is something very important for the market to expand. So this will only happen when early adopters, and we pass the curve of adoption, that we have the ultra early adopters, as Hakan mentioned, the AISPs, so account information service providers, are not that booming and still getting traction. But it comes with the super apps. So it's something very close to my heart as well, specifically insurance, because we also want to be part of an ecosystem. So how to get there in the super apps? Because the ownership of the customer is that where it gets fuzzy. Whoever is adaptable, and the adaptability is the key here to maintain customer ownership, is that those digital experiences that are being provided for the customers, as smooth as they are and as frictionless as they are, will be the ones that will own at least the interface and the app time, from those not being only the back-end APIs that those banks are going to provide, or banks or insurers or whatever financial touch point that you have in your life where you have a different app for it. So imagine, you know that you have your insurance, your auto insurance, home insurance, life insurance. your mortgages, and having each app for this, or having to have a touch point, a different touch point for those, it's very scattered and very cumbersome for you to click on an app every time that you want to know your financial situation. So flexibility in those user experiences are what will maintain and guarantee customer ownership. And this is very specific for insurance as well. We don't want to lose the relationship of the customer and be just a provider of policies. We want to still be known for the partnership for those customers, that whenever something as a current or as an event that happens in their lives, we want to be there for them. And this is very crucial for insurance, to be known that we are there for them, not an app is there for them. And the human relationship of it is still a touch point, especially for life insurance, not so much in other insurance scopes. And Hakan also touched on how it panned out on open data. On I can say, being a Brazilian, I can see how it develops there, and how they're building this specific for credit scoring. So it goes beyond sharing data among your bank, finance, and creating a super app approach, but also to limit and to enable for you to be able to connect with other entities, providing an easy access to credit, providing easy access to your mortgage, because your financial life is already pertaining to a certain chain that you can open, enable, and make it available, if you so want, to ease of access and create the adaptability and flexibility of use. So connecting the dots, I think that's not in a nutshell, but more or less things that we can look upon.
Great, thank you very much for that, Pedro. Thank you as well to Hakan. Gina, at this point, let's bring you into the discussion. Your thoughts on what you just heard, and anything you want to bring in at this point, please?
Yeah, I know we're going to talk about consumers and the kind of the customer journey later on, but if you just look at the impact the pandemic has had on progressing open banking in terms of the customer narrative, it just seems like everybody has spent the last 18 months either building an API or finding a great partner to work with. And now all those kind of achievements, we're hearing lots of developments. And I think from my point of view, the word is co-opetition, because you've either got a kind of a bank working to develop its own line and its own strategy, moving away from kind of legacy architecture, or you've got a real great partnership with a fintech that can make it speed very, very quickly. So from my point of view, it's a hugely exciting time to be in the space. And I think there's only going to be better news on the horizon pretty much. But certainly that kind of co-opetition, banks, insurance, technology providers have to make a decision. Are they working together, or is it going to be a standalone product?
Great, thanks so much for that, Gina. The next question we got from our panelists is, where are we seeing tangible value from open banking? Hakan, if we come back to you straight away with that one, please.
Let's look into this first of all, from the consumer's perspective, and also from the industry, or let's say from the bank's perspective or the fintech's perspective. I think for the consumers, and we will probably discuss a little bit more later, is about that. They don't. I mean, open banking is a topic for experts, for people in the industry. But end consumers are not interested in what open banking is. They are interested in the use cases. So what can I do? And what are the benefits? And if I have to open up my data for that, let's do it, right? So I think the story is quite important, and the benefit for them to understand. However, I live in Switzerland, in Zurich. And we just recently, in Mastercard, we did a survey just for this country, and just quite interesting to highlight, because it's a quite conservative market, and consumers are super loyal to their banks, and they are not willing to change a bank just because a few francs of cheaper or for a free account. So they're really sticking with their brands and the trust that they have. And what we have discovered is that in normal times, consumers are willing to change the bank with around 3% of the customers are willing to change their bank because of some benefits like price or other things. But when they get better services like enabled through open banking, they're even willing to change the bank with like customers up to 20% would be willing to change a bank. So just to highlight one number, that there is benefit and value for customers as well that they see enabled through open banking. Now, looking from the bank's perspective, and Pedro has mentioned some of the different applications and use cases that can create value in terms of new revenue streams and new distribution channels for banks, is banking as a service. I think that's an embedded finance, which is highly linked to open finance, to have atomic capabilities, banking capabilities, like applying for a loan or a credit scoring, open a bank account. These are all services that can be exposed as embedded finance applications to tech companies, to telco companies, to insurance companies, to allow them to build their own journey, and where banks play a role in that journey and generate new revenue streams. Another one that we see is typically, and it's quite a big trend, with buy now, pay later. Credit scoring is a super important capability in that context. And open banking also helps to have more reach and more, let's say, completing data in order to enrich the risk models and get better results of the current financial situation of the customer, and not historical, but current situation. So it's quite useful. And we see also the trend of the typical PFM marketplaces, comparison sites, quite interesting one as well for end consumers is, and also for banks, to play a role on comparison sites, because open banking regulations in many countries are being implemented because of to increase competition and to allow customers to compare products and prices and switch accounts. So product switch, account switch, these type of use cases are all integral part of open finance as well, to compare, to switch quickly loans and mortgages, to reduce costs for the economy. So that's an interesting one as well. And just the last one I wanted to mention is, and I highlighted that at the beginning, is new type of payment mechanisms or payment flows. For example, in the UK, Tesco Bank is, for example, offering to their customers pay by bank to pay for their credit card bill, for example. So once they get their credit card bill, customers can use open banking rails to make a payment, account-to-account payment. And there are plenty of other examples as well. Then we see CMA in the UK regulating also variable recurrent payments to allow subscription suppliers, providers like video streaming services and others to make payments on customers' bank account without strong customer authentication, kind of recurrent payments. It's an interesting one. Another one is sweeping that we're seeing right now, to allow new type of third-party providers to advise customers and automatically buy and sell stocks, ETFs, and different investment products on behalf of the customers. But also in order to fund that transactions, you need to sweep money around different accounts and save costs. I think there is a lot of benefits that we see, but there is no big killer application as such, other than maybe the super app, if someone gets that one. And there's, for example, plenty of space for multiple applications. But I see the power of open finance and open banking more in that having a set of applications and services and playing an integral part, an important part in the journey of a customer in different areas, different marketplaces. That's what we see right now happening behind the curtains.
Great, thanks very much for that, Hakan. And Pedro, anything to add to what you heard from Hakan there, please?
Very comprehensive. I think it's a challenge for me to even complement it. Few bullets on what Hakan mentioned. He said, and he touched upon something very interesting. Well, in looking holistically, what is in for the customer? What is in for me? If they think about it, why would I do that? Why would I be an adopter of getting there? Seeing the easiness of transition between services and getting those embedded services that would help them ease their customer journeys and the digital experiences that they have in a broader ecosystem would, and with a fair and very ethical usage of the data that those companies would be given the possibility to use and to treat the data. I think it lies on trust, specifically from a life insurance as an end is as big managing risk for how they could provide better experience for the customers, is that this trust element of having your life insurance being designed and assessed and also measured, or at least tailored for you based on assessments of your current needs, as Hakan said, the current assessment is something that would be very beneficial for them to use it on the overall and the holistic view of their wealth, health, and the well-being as a customer. For connecting to that is how you play out in the ecosystem base. So be it for Klarna being a buy now, pay later, and all the trends that we have on buy now, pay later, is looking at the exchanges that they would have in the digital experiences, provided that the data that would be shared would be given with trust and with ethical use. I think customers would be willing to do so, looking at how easy it would be to have those digital experiences provided. So, and across the board of any financial touch point that they will have with other companies or organizations. And it would go broader than just banks, insurance, and other financial institutions, because this could be also an element of how you could engage and connect with governments or in IRS and doing your tax declarations and things that would be very beneficial for the customer to do so, if given trust is deliberately part of the agreement between them. I think that's just the trust element. It's an important aspect of what is in for them.
Great, thank you very much for that, Pedro. And now let's bring Gina back in. Gina, is there any questions or anything from the audience you want to bring in, or any comments you want to make?
Definitely, the chat is looking really good. I've got lots of questions lined up. I thought it might be good to start with Arjun, who said that he's interested in your view on how open banking is impacting SMEs. So that's SMEs rather than individual users. Hakan, should we start with you on that one?
Yeah, sure. I think from the banks, let's say we have seen multiple examples in the market for SMEs as well. And the good thing about SMEs and corporates is that it's kind of, let's say, less complex, or let's say easier to generate revenues compared to retail. So in retail, you need to focus on how do you generate insights, how can you use the data in order to cross upsell different products and services to retail customers. But for SMEs and corporates, they're willing to pay fees or like a price for benefits, right, to make things easier for their lives. And for SMEs, for example, we have seen examples around bookkeeping, the cloud-based bookkeeping software providers who are providing, online accounting solutions where they have connected to bank accounts, helping banks, because in the past they had to do things manually. Now they can do it in an automated way, providing automated invoice matching, reverse factoring. So there's a lot happening right now with different tech companies doing like one-trick ponies, I would say. They are really good in that, what they can do in that space. And we see those platforms, for example, evolving into a platform too, using open API mechanisms to connect different third parties on that platform to serve customers out of one hand. And banks are also doing that. So they're collaborating, working with fintechs and integrating those capabilities into the bank, white labeling it, and offering that to their customers. So that's, by the way, also benefit of open banking, because we only talked about, or mostly talked about access to bank account, sharing data. But why not using open API mechanisms, since banks have implemented for those who have done it anyways? Why not using that to build your own marketplaces, building your own products with third parties? So we have seen SME use cases here. Then other things, areas are to optimize eKYC or onboarding of SMEs. It's a huge topic. It's of course more complex than onboarding retail customers. And a lot of paperwork need to be done. So how can I use open banking mechanisms to improve and make it more seamless, the whole onboarding process for SMEs? Then last one, and there are more, I just wanted to be short, the corporate one. There are benefits for corporate customers, especially for treasurers, for example, who are using open corporate APIs. So there are large corporate banks who are doing that for many years already, building big pipes of APIs, specialized real-time APIs that are integrated in ERP systems. so that corporate users can also benefit from API-enabled use cases as well.
Great, that's very comprehensive. Thank you. Also from the chat, Ivo says that platform and API banking seems very hard to get off the ground as it's a software-based product offering, completely different from a traditional business product by a bank. Pedro, how do you think banks can be persuaded to develop or adapt these new types of technical services?
Great question. Thank you, Gina. From banks, I believe that it could be something that as an added value for customers to use it and to have a possibility to engage directly through their unique access point and the touch point of the banks itself, themselves, they would be able to provide this to customers, as Hakan mentioned. They're white labeling some of the partnerships that they have on the back end, being able to connect the front line of what their customers are looking for or being given access to through their apps or through their web pages, through their internet bankings, and having this as what are the other benefits they can connect to. So having the marketplace and a marketplace from one touch point that is providing a digital experience. So your entry point is your bank. So looking ahead, what are the other touch points that from that specifically unique entry you could connect to? Just bridging the dots between the SME as well, because for insurers, what we have in insurance, giving employee benefits for an insurer is that we receive a bulk of names and a bulk of people that will be benefited from having a third-party contract that the insurer is providing to the company in a massive account. But what it can be done as a marketplace as well is you already have that given product from your employer. Would you like to have an overall view of what coverages do you have in your direct vicinity, in your network, in your family? So are you protected from other parts? Is it your auto, your home, your pensions or mortgages that you like to change or substitute? Those things are having one entry point and building your own marketplaces that would be connected on a backend, connected from a technology standpoint that will ease the access for customers to have access to. This is a change of paradigm.
Great, thank you very much for that, Pedro. Thank you very much for that line of questioning as well, Gina. Do keep your questions coming in to our audience. Pop them in the chat and we'll bring them into the discussion as we can. Okay, let's move on. The next question we've got is, should open data across all sectors and industries be the eventual aim? Pedro, if we come back to you on that one, please, first of all.
Of course. Eventual aim. I think that with great powers comes great responsibilities, right? And with this, having an access or at least an overall open data, unless treated, again, the trust, the ethical part, and how this data could be accessed to, and having a very granular approach of what individuals and customers could be sharing and individualized on a personalized basis, providing it, so to not have scrutinized lives because of this data in every field of their lives to be provided or at least seen. It could be tricky. So I'll not be as daring to say that it is a trend, but I believe that with gradual steps, it could be something that providing data given the consciousness of how this could be used and utilized and shared, it could be a potential use, especially if you break the barrier of the early adopters saying this is something that it can be done. It can be done in a trustworthy way.
Great, thank you very much for that, Pedro. And Hakan, do you have any thoughts on that one as well? Should open data across all sectors and industries be the eventual aim?
I mean, in the end, the consumer decides. So whatever is attractive for consumers, they are willing to share data. And if it means that other industries are opening up as well, then this is the case. However, data is being shared anyways, and many consumers don't know what data has been exposed, what cookies they have accepted, right, on the browser, on the app. And we hear a lot of, examples in the market of data being misused, or customers don't know what data has been shared. So that's something that needs to be, let's say, more more organized in a way that consumers get back control about the data that they share, and that they're aware what data has been shared to whom, for what purpose, and that they are also in a position to withdraw consent from different players, right? I think the whole data control, consent management will become more and more important in the course of the time with more use cases coming up. And I think openness in other industries, I mean, we have seen in Australia, we see that with open banking, but also other industries like telcos and others need to open up as well the data. That's something that in some jurisdictions is happening, and something that cannot be stopped because there is need for different type of use cases, especially in the European Union. When you look into the EU data strategy that was published, I think last year or the year before last year, where the EU Commission was saying, we need to share more data and to allow new type of services to reduce energy consumption, to meet the goals of net zero when it comes to carbon footprint. So there are a lot of let's say overall goals that are there that needs to be achieved, like that one that I just mentioned with net zero and others that open data. I mean, we just talked about the use case for retail customers, SMEs, but there are overarching use cases as well for the societies that where data can add value to optimize and reduce costs and energy consumption and so on and so forth. I think that's also important. I want to highlight. And then looking at Europe with GDPR, I mean, GDPR is a regulation that allows exposure of data in the end, because it manages how data can be shared, and with the consent of customers, with a long rule set, right? However, it is possible to share data once customers provide consent. The only missing link that we see here is that the data can be shared in any way, right? In any type of way. It can be printed, can be sent via email, via letter or so, but not via machine-readable APIs. In PSD2 and open banking regulations, many regulations clearly states that it has to be exposed via APIs. In some data protection regulations, it is not clearly stated that it has to be exposed in machine-readable APIs. So there's more and more happening, and I think it's more about collaboration with different industry players to come up with use cases that are generating revenues, that are beneficiary for the consumers. But there is no simple answer if open data is really is that what you need to solve problems. But there are different areas where collaboration of data sharing is useful with a protected environment for consumers to control data flows.
Great, thanks very much for that, Hakan. And Gina, let's bring you back in. Any thoughts you have on what you just you heard, or any questions to bring in?
Yeah, I mean, certainly open data is very interesting, but there are some considerations to have in mind. And as Hakan said, that data has value. So, when you have your financial data stored in the cloud, where is that actually being serviced from? Essentially, this discussion on data sovereignty, I don't think it's going away anytime soon. I think it's going to play on until some sort of more regulation comes into play. And I know the European Union is working hard on how to do that. So it'd be interesting to see what comes out of there. And to be honest, there are lots of cloud initiatives and cloud partnerships going on, not just with the big players, but also from the hundreds of cloud providers that we have around the world. So as I say, I'm going to be very interested to see how that one pans out. I think just jumping back into the chat quickly, maybe this one can add into that as well. Saeed asks if the experience in Europe with respect to managing end user complaints, anything that kind of results from open banking disrupted journeys or wrong payments under the payment initiation services, what happens there? Is there any kind of legal responsibilities? And maybe Hakan, do you have anything to add on that to start with?
I think that's something that the ecosystem need to find ways of allowing, especially in payments, for example, to have chargeback mechanisms in place, to allow customers to when they have a complaint on I was not the person who made the payment or didn't authorize the payment, that's something that need to be solved. I think that's there are solutions and ideas in place that can manage this to allow that. Others are, for example, for exposing data and or data breach or so. I think that's one of the building blocks that in PSD2 or in UK open banking and in other regions that are implementing open banking regulations. And I'm talking a lot with regulators too, when it comes to lessons learned and what can we do differently. These are also building blocks that these countries are looking at. How can I build a legal framework as well on top of that to allow liability? To orchestrate and to manage a liability. So how does liability look like in a open banking or open finance framework? Is it the TPP who is initiating the transaction, or can they push it back to the banks to say you authorized and I just collected the info from the customer? So that's not very obvious, and I think that's super important in this whole discussion here, because in the end we want to serve end consumers, be it retail, corporate, or SME customers, and trust needs to be there. So trust is very important here as well, and the solution cannot be that if a customer buys an insurance, for example, on a third-party comparison site and something goes wrong, who's liable and who's going to solve it? Or you make a payment in e-coms and there are 2-3 players involved in this whole process, who's liable here? And existing payment mechanisms liability is very clear, but in open banking, open finance is something that is in the making, and there are lessons learned that can be implemented, but we are still in that process of solving it.
Great, thank you very much for that, Hakan, and thank you for that line of questioning as well, Gina. We're down to the last sort of few minutes now for the discussion. So my final question for our speakers is, are the benefits of open banking actually reaching the consumer? Pedro, let's come to you first on that one, please.
Thank you, Mark. Good point. I don't think that it will reach the critical mass of adoption yet. So reaching end consumers, specifically on what we are trying to do, we're setting up those partnerships, creating the foundations of ecosystems that will allow them to have the easiness and the adaptability to use the combined products or the combined view that would benefit customers precisely. And I think there is a lot of advocacy to do and to advocate and to evangelize users that how they could benefit from it. So getting back to your first question, or the second one, what's in for me? Without their awareness, I think it will still be the early adoption phase that will not get to the point where they'll benefit. In our insurance space, we see that knowing that the long-term relationship that is between an insurer and the end user and the end consumer towards the insurer with this 30, 35 years policies, it's something that if you don't get there and you're not present in their lives, in their anniversary letters, when you have the yearly visits, and showing this to them that they could potentially benefit by providing access to data, having information from an open finance, open data perspective, it'll be a slow adoption. So from insurance, if I would have a clear answer, not yet. I think there's a lot of work to do still, and it could benefit a lot people to have a better holistic view on their wealth, health, and well-being. And I think that it's a great foundation because ecosystems are being built, platforms are being built, and this open APIs and gig economy connecting with incumbents is something that we want to generate traction and give the best what we can for the customers. So not yet, we're getting there.
Great, thanks so much for that, Pedro. Let's come back to you, Gina. I think anything else to add to that? Anything else to bring in at this point? We've only got a few minutes left.
Yeah, I think it's actually quite encouraging from my point of view. I think that despite the banks sort of dragging their heels to implement PSD2, I think now that it's there, a lot of us are getting used to kind of the digital applications we can use our online banking for, mobile banking. So from my point of view, I think consumer knowledge is certainly improving. Is it perfect? No. Is there still lots to be done? Yes. But I think certainly with more of us using online banking since the kind of the lockdowns began, it's going in the right direction. So that's kind of where I'd like to leave my view. But I think just jumping back to the chat for one final question, and I love Tao's question. What are your predictions on when open finance is a reality in Europe? So I guess that's a looking forward. What would you like to see when we're all using it daily? Hakan, do you want to start us off on that one?
I love these questions. I think that's coming step by step, right? So with open finance, I mean, there's kind of probably going to be a regulatory framework in Europe sometime soon. The EU Commission has announced that there will be something coming up next year. In what shape and form, we don't know yet in more detail, but there will be something coming up. But I think it's more like a journey for the next couple of years. And again, we need to think about also from a definition perspective, what open finance really is. As I said, it's access to data, more data, but it's also allowing consumers to have more, let's say, more choice in managing their finance, buying different type of financial products and so on and so forth. But we see that with credit scoring, buy now, pay later, variable recurrent payments, sweeping, and other topics that are being tackled right now, we're getting there step by step, but it's a journey for the next couple of years. And it's much bigger than open banking, right? With PSD2, we just started, and implementation is not 100% completed yet. And open finance is going into much broader scope. So the journey will be probably longer, and banks need to be prepared as well, because the reality happens now too, because there are other platform players or pay tech companies who are tapping into in the value chain of banks as well, offering different type of banking services along the line on top of payments, for example. So there's a lot happening, and don't wait for regulation, because regulation is going to organize and bring things in order in the end, but not shaping the market. It's the market and the consumers that are shaping the market. So that's what I want to say as a giveaway last word.
Great, thank you so much for that, Hakan. That's all we've got time for now, unfortunately. So I'd just like to place on record my thank you to Pedro and to Hakan and to Gina. Thank you so much for joining us. A great session, some great comments and insight. Thank you so much. Thank you to you, our audience, for joining us. Our next session is at 1 o'clock BST with Moving to a Cashless Society. We hope you can stay around and join us for that one. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again soon, and more chat from Banking Innovation Summit. Thank you.